Brenda Sanchez is a water quality policy specialist with Oregon Department of Agriculture. She's part of the Water Quality Program Leadership Team. She leads ODA's Strategic Implementation Areas Initiative, where she works closely with soil and water conservation districts, agricultural landowners, and other partners to implement ODA's agricultural water quality program. She provides technical expertise as a member of the state's pesticide water quality management team, conservation effectiveness partnership, and a host of other water quality working groups. And she has a Bachelor of Environmental Science from Montana State University, has been working to improve water quality in the state of Oregon for over 12 years. Brenda, thanks so much for joining us this evening. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Mike. So, what I want to do tonight is I'm going to talk to all of you about water. And, first I'd like to let you know I do work for Oregon Department of Agriculture as a water quality specialist, and I've been working a long time with landowners. Before ODA, I used to work for the Marion Soil and Water Conservation District. I used to work with landowners out on the landscape, doing conservation plans and providing technical assistance, writing grants to help them get into incentive programs. I also worked for the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs for many years as a soil scientist. My experience there was very diverse, but I had a lot of work in timber sales and forestry operations and stream restoration. So I have a real varied background. And tonight I'm gonna start off with just some fun water facts, get your mind kind of thinking about water. And then I'm gonna jump into some hydrology 101, stuff you probably already know, but it's good to set the premise and have you thinking about where your property is in the watershed. After that, I get into a little bit of land use, and I'll talk about soil health. And there's a reason I bring up the topic soil and water management. It's actually very important, and I'm sure they're going to expand on that in the next presentation. So soil is your friend. Also, I've got some land use and some ideas about how to manage for water quality on your property. So I thought this was very fascinating I went ahead of myself, to learn that there's the same amount of water on the earth today as when the earth was first formed. And that amount of water, that 100% of water, is 97% of that water is salty, and you can't drink it, you can't use it. It's tied up in glacier, in oceans and air. And then 2% is locked in the ice caps and glaciers. So I think that's really interesting. When you see glaciers, they look so enormous, but they only capture about 2% of the water on our planet. So that leaves us with about 1% of water that we all need to drink and grow and produce fiber and manage our landscape. So it's pretty phenomenal when you think all the stuff that we can do with what we have. But it's also real important to remember why we need to think about water quality and water quantity. I think we all know the body's made up of a lot of water. 75% of our brain is water, and also a large pine tree. If you look at a living tree, 75% of it's water. And the average total home water use for a person and individual in the United States is about 50 gallons a day. I hope I don't use that much. I try not to. So water quality management in Oregon, I'm going to give you a little premise about what we do as Oregonians in here in Oregon. And back in the 1972, there was the Clean Water Act, and it delegated to the states that they can manage water quality at the state level, and so with that comes about the different agencies and all the different things and rules and regulations that come up regarding water quality. But all of the guidelines and regulations are all based on these beneficial uses, and in the Willamette Valley, water is valued for many reasons, from anything from just looking at it, just sitting on the stream side and looking at the water. It brings much to many people's lives. Boating and fishing, industrial water supply, irrigation, livestock need water. They get it from our surface waters. And of course, our public and domestic water supply, that drinking water and cooking water, of course, important to all of us. And of course, wildlife and aquatic life, many uses and benefits to the water resources in Oregon. So this slide is it says Marion County, but I went to look in to make sure, and it's very similar. All of Willamette Valley pretty much has water quality concerns related to streams and rivers. There's monitoring throughout the state, and they take that data and they process it and analyze it and look at the stream, and they determine, the state will determine if that's an impaired stream, so and what those problems are. For us here in the Willamette Valley, stream temperature is a big issue with our streams. Stream temperature is really important for aquatic wildlife, for salmon, for rearing, and for navigating to their headwaters, and many things they use the stream temperature in that regards. Bacteria can come from lots of places, but once it's in the water in an amount, if you're swimming, you don't want bacteria on you. Sediment is a big issue. There's a normal background proponent to sediment that's natural in our systems, but land use definitely has increased the amount of sediment that reaches our streams. Nutrients, fertilizers, livestock manure, all of those produce nutrients, and when they leave your property and leave off site via stormwater and enter streams, you get too much nutrients in your water supply, and you have other issues like harmful algal blooms. Pesticide residues, if people use pesticides, it's the fact of life. So, stormwater can pick up those residues and carry them off into streams as well. Metals are naturally in our environment, and there are problems such as mercury and cadmium and some of those other toxic metals, and they can get into our streams naturally, but they also can enter through soil erosion, which is another reason why we want to keep our eye on sediment. And then toxics, and that's a whole nother subject of just runoff, stormwater runoff, and that's getting into the oceans, such as I saw a list from a watering monitoring program. There was like 150 toxics being showing up in water samples, anywhere from flame retardant to plastics, etc.
Hey, Brenda.
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat about whether there's a site online where participants could access water quality maps for other counties.
That's a great question. And if you just do an internet search for DEQ Oregon Water Quality Mapper, and I can get a link to your host there, and she can send it off to you if you like. But what you'll get is the state's water quality map. It's open. Anyone can look at it and open it up, and you can just navigate to the stream or watershed you're interested in. And if there's monitoring locations on that stream, there'll be a little dot you can click on, and up will pop results from what that is. So if it's a stream temperature monitoring, it'll pop up and give you some current data. If it's sediment or anywhere where it's available. As you'll see, there's a lot of water quality gaps for data in the state of Oregon. So you may get to a watershed that you live in and there's no data. And that's something, if you're in a watershed council or in the district and you really want to know more about that, something to bring up if you want to get more data. There's other ways to start those kind of monitoring projects in your area. So yeah, that's a picture of actually what I'm showing you, the mapper there, Marion County. And all those different colored streams are the different types of pollutant that they're representing, that they have samples and data for. Is that a good? Did I get that answer good? You think?
That is perfect. Thank
all
you.
right.
And Mike put a link in the chat, folks, if you want to go check it out.
Oh, perfect. There you go. So there's two types of water pollution when you're thinking about pollutants. You got non-point source and point source. So a point source is, it's coming out of a pipe. So, the wastewater treatment plant that, discharges water. They, of course, have a permit to do that, but that's a point source. And that would be regulated by the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. They do a lot of the city stormwater and industrial type permitting. And then there's non-point source, which is really relevant to a lot of the land uses that we use, agriculture, timber, those types of land uses where you've got stormwater that hits farmland and then drains off and picks up pollutants and takes it to streams. That would be a non-point source because those pollutants are coming from many areas, many landscapes, and contributing. So there's no one single source to tie it back to. So I'd be amiss if I didn't tell you guys about regulations. So I won't get too deep into it. Oops. Try not to. There we go. So there are regulations to how you manage water, depending on what you want to do. If you want to if you have a stream going through your land and you want to put in farmland, you have to, make sure you're not working in wetlands and you're not removing vegetation from streams. And depending on how much you want to remove from a stream, you would need a permit from the Department of State Lands. So they manage that fill and removal aspect of management. There's also the Oregon Water Resources Department. If you want to build a pond or store water, you would have to contact them and get a permit for that. Then there's Oregon Department of Agriculture. We have area rules and regulations related to specifically your area, South San Diego. The Department of Agriculture split the state up into different management areas, and each management area has a set of regulations. And I put that in some materials that I sent to Mike to share with you. A little flyer on the left kind of gives you a summary of what the rules are. And then on the right's an area plan. That's just the plan we work under. And then of course there's Department of Forestry. If you have a small woodlands or forested areas and you harvest timber, you'd have to follow the Forest Practices Act. And then of course there's always city and county stormwater rules. So it is quite layered. And a watershed council and a soil and water conservation district can help you get to the right people when those kind of situations come up. But just for your information as landowners, and if you have any agricultural activities, so these area rules apply to the activity. It's not applies to like a county where it's a farm use area. I mean, there may be farming there, but it really applies to the activity. So a person in the city who's keeping chickens would come under this rule if they were taking that manure from the chickens and polluting with it. So this is the waste rule. It's something to keep in mind when you're planning your landscape, how you're going to manage waste. Waste is manure, excess soil, fertilizer, other substances that can pollute water. And it's, you cannot put those items at waste in an area where it can be removed off-site and enter waters of the state. So you wouldn't put a manure pile on a slope ground near a stream, or a manure pile on ground next to your wellhead. So those are things that you have to think about when you're putting things in and managing waste on your property. The other rule I wanted to talk about, where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Sorry, I got the slippery mouse here, is the vegetation rule. And this also applies. You cannot let agricultural activities prevent the ongoing growth and establishment of streamside vegetation. So you just can't go in and start removing vegetation along perennial streams. If you're trying to put in a new crop, or you're setting up a pasture, or your heavy use area, you have to really think about how that land use, that ag activity, will impact streamside vegetation over time. So on year-round streams, it's expected that trees, shrubs, and ground cover, grass will grow along streams. If you've got a seasonal stream, the expectations are shrubs or grassland, depending on the stream type. So there should be some kind of vegetation growing along your streams, depending on whether they're perennial or seasonal. And I don't want to get off too much in that, but just think about that when you're making your plans, and think about where your streams are and what your activities are doing to impact the vegetation along them. And why is that? Because streamside vegetation does a lot of work for us. It takes, if you just let it do what it needs to do, it will filter pollutants. So when the rain hits the ground and runs off toward the stream, those vegetative roots will help filter pollutants out. Those roots also help stabilize the stream bank and hold the stream bank in place and keep soil where it needs to be, so your stream bank isn't moving or sloughing. And it also provides shade. Remember, I was talking about stream temperature. The plants along streams provide an important function in preventing water from heating up from sun. Okay. So conservation planning, and that's what you guys are doing here tonight. You're working with the Watershed Council. You're learning about how to plan your land, and I don't know if you've got planning templates and you're filling all that out, but it's actually really fun. And you know, the plan itself is important, but it's the planning part where you really learn. And so dig into the details. And one of the things you want to know when you're thinking about your landscape and water management is, where are you at in the watershed, and how is this hydrologic cycle impacting you throughout the year? So water, like I said earlier, is all in one, there's 100% of amount of water, and it's all in these different stages. Water can be locked up in the ocean, in streams, in subsurface groundwater, clouds, air, glaciers. It's all in this cycle, and it's just shifting around. And I think I saw somewhere where they took a drop of water and they think it takes about 1,000 years for a drop of water to go through the process, the hydrologic cycle. And another thing to think about also is in your landscape that you may not see water. Oh, we'll get into that. Let me get to that slide actually. So that's the cycle. Just know that water is always changing. You guys know that. It's raining today and then sunny, and then it's snowing in the mountains. And so real important to how water is managed. And where are you at in the watershed? And the watershed is just defined by the boundaries of where a raindrop would fall when it hits the ground. And you get these basins, and we have them all over, all over. The higher you're up in a watershed, you're probably in the forested area. And as you come down to the watershed, you're down by the main rivers and bottomlands, ag lands, urban areas. And think of a watershed that its biggest function is to capture, store, and release water, like a sponge does. When it gets wet, when it rains, the watershed absorbs that water, takes it into the system, and captures it and releases it slowly over time so that we can have that water in the summer. It's really interesting to think about how a watershed's like a sponge. So and land use, impermeable surfaces we pave, begins to make the watershed like a glass bowl, and water will just slide off instead of being captured and released later. And that goes to these different drainages that I was talking about. So up in the forested lands, that's our highest infiltration for rain. I think it's like 80% of the rain that comes down in a forest is captured. And then that surface water drains down through the system, like I said, down to the urban and ag lands. And things you want to know is, where is that water moving on your property? Where are you at in the watershed? And maybe you don't see it now, maybe you don't see it in the summer, but maybe this is an area that floods or ponds in the winter because water is traveling down to your site. And not only that, but what's below your feet? You may not see water, but a lot of times water is moving just a couple of feet below our own feet. So that's real important in where you place things and how you manage what your land use is for your property. Yeah, again, this is that slide on the subsurface. So as much that drains off the top, there's as much draining below our feet. And so think about those type of, your property is above groundwater. And so you want to protect both surface and groundwater. So soil health. So I said, why would I bring soil health into a water subject? And it's actually very, very important to managing water and runoff on your property. By maintaining good soil health, which is defined here as the continued capacity of soil to function as a living ecosystem that sustains plants and animals and humans. And through soil health, we can manage water quality. We can, and it fits in most situations. There's times when soil health principles might not apply, but there's 4 basic ones. You minimize soil disturbance. And by minimizing soil disturbance, you allow for soil structure to remain intact. And that soil structure can absorb rainwater and perk it down into the ground. It's very important. But if you maintain a diverse plant mix on your soil resources, that provides for different types of microbial life and different plants to thrive. And all of that helps to break down pollutants and extra nutrients. It allows you to use less of those, less pesticides and less nutrients. So you have less running off your property. Also keeping live green cover or living roots helps keep the soil healthy by keeping those microbes fed year round. And they're always, by them being fed, they're making soil for you. They're doing all the hard work. And all of these principles together, like grass is great on a flat area or a slope. It really will bring that rain into the soil profile. So there's a saying in soil science that bare soil is dead soil. And so you always want to manage for those bare areas on your property and keep them covered. And why I was saying it was important to water quality management is it influences how pollutants such as nutrients, bacteria, and pesticide residues are transported to ground and surface water. So healthy soils help clean the water and help you have to do less work. Okay, so some of the things that soil health helps with, it increases the water infiltration, like I was saying. Excuse me. Let me take a little drink of water. Also, by holding water better, back to that watershed description of capturing, if we have a good system that's capturing water and it's not all running off, you have more available soil holding water capacity, so you don't have to irrigate as early. So by capturing water in your landscape, if you do have to irrigate your lawn or your farm or your crops, you wouldn't have to do it till late summer because you still have soil water in your soil profile. It also improves drainage. So if, areas where it floods, soil health by keeping all the cover on there and mulch, or like this little diagram shows here, it improves that. It improves the flooding and ponding by sucking the water down into the ground as quickly as it can. And then that water helps recharge your groundwater resources. So if you're living off a well, you want to keep your groundwater recharge going. Like I said earlier, by improving your soil health, you're using less, it really helps with beneficial insects. You use less pesticides, you use less nutrients. So that's less stuff leaving the property and hitting the waters. And then nutrient cycling is real important. That helps feed the plants and the ground cover that you have there, your farm, your small garden, whatever you're trying to grow, that'll be real helpful for you. Healthy soils resist soil erosion. So if you got ground cover on your soil, it's most likely going to stay there, and unless you've got a slope or you've got some kind of gully or rills starting to form, and that's when you have to start managing for soil erosions by getting those rills and gullies fixed. And I think I went through a lot of that already.
Brenda?
Yeah.
I have a question in the chat, and I may ask Greg to come off mute and clarify this question, but his question is, how much grass or greenery is required to effectively filter rainwater and runoff from entering a stream?
Oh, great question. So I'm going to say it's dependent on where you are in the watershed. If you're on slope ground, you probably want a real good dense cover. On bottom lands, you want enough to just get the water to go into the ground and not evaporate. I don't have an exact measurement for you. I think as long as you have some type of ground cover, and it could be mulch, it can be straw. There's different ways. Talk to the Watershed Council. Maybe they can come out and see what you're trying to seed or establish on and give you some better description guidance on that. Do we think, I think I answered your question maybe? Left you with more questions? I don't know.
That was a great response. And we've got video from Greg for the first time. Greg, did that answer your question?
Kind of, sort of. I am on slope ground. I have a lot of forested and pastured area along a primary spring that originates, or a primary stream that originates on my property from a spring, and I just want to ensure it gets protected. So I'll consult with the experts here.
Yeah, and and the best way is to be hands off in those springs areas, and maybe manage for weeds and let it grow. Make sure you got good stuff there so you don't have to keep going in with the weed management. But as long as you just let it be, it should be okay. But yeah, the experts. Here's a great photo of a soil health demonstration where they put these 5 containers that have different types of ground cover on them and did a little rain simulation. And in the jars below, it captured the runoff. And you can see the different colors and how it responded to the cover. So like on the far left, that's bare ground and the water is very dirty. Whereas you go to the one on the second in from the left, which has nice ground cover on it and grass, you see the water's pretty clear. And these were all done in the same soil type with just different covers on it. So it's kind of demonstrates the need for that ground cover.
Brenda, I think we have a vocab question in the chat. Yvonne asks, you mentioned something about a water swell or a rill will appear. Yvonne, is that what you were asking about? Kind of what those things mean? She says yes. So a water swell or a rill?
Sure. A rill is so when it rains and soil erodes, it starts to make these lines in the soil, like little tiny channels. They're real small, maybe the width of a nickel or a penny. And those are showing you that water is hitting the ground and moving away from where it hit, that it's eroding. And so rills, these lines in the sand and the soil can indicate that you're having soil erosion. I don't have a picture of one, but I might have one I can pop up later on. And then rills can lead to a gully where it just starts to rip open, where the water has found a place to concentrate and run off. So that happens a lot on sloped fields, where you might get a big gully opening up in the middle of a sloped field because the water's concentrating and eroding down. And so, and usually those gulls and rillies are taking stormwater off site and getting either into a ditch or a stream. So they're just indications that you're having soil erosion issues. And you would see it on bare soil is where those would be.
And Melissa says in the chat that she's got photos in her talk, so you're in luck.
Oh, good. There you go. Thanks, Melissa. She's all over it. So this slide, this here on the left is a picture of a grass seed situation where a grass seed farmer waited until late October to till and seed a newly established grass field. He had to clear it because it had ended its 4-year rotation or something. And the very next day, a very big storm came through Washington County, and a lot of his soil ran off of his, and it didn't even have that big a slope, but it did slope, right onto the road there in the background. It's now cleaned up, but it flooded and brought soil all onto the roadway. And you can see it came toward this grate, which is a stormwater grate. So the county called me and said, hey, I've got an issue. There's a farm here and so we had to go and address it. But, you know, you don't want to go into the winter season in the Willamette Valley with bare ground, especially if you've got a small farm or a large farm. You know, you really want to not let that happen. And he had to come in and immediately put in silt fences. He had to mulch the whole hillside. The county had to go into their grates and they had to go into their stormwater system and clean it out. They were really kind and didn't bill the landowner, but they said if it happened again, they would. So this can cost you money. And so just, you know, keeping the soil covered and going and doing different things. This is probably more for farming, but if you practice conservation tillage, in other words, you don't till up your soil and rip it up every year. You know, let it be, let it only aerate it as needed. You know, rolling and crimping and chopping plant residues into your topsoil. And you can do this in your own backyard garden or urban garden or small farm. Planting, of course, diverse seed mixes and having different types of plant species growing. If you're intercropping and you got a small farm and you've got, you know, I think I saw a great example of a hazelnut orchard where it was newly established. They just put in seedlings and they were growing strawberries in between the orchard rows until crown cover came in. So they were able to, you know, get another crop out of that. Rotating your crops throughout the year and your farm, getting different crops going through it, utilizing winter cover crops and planting trees and shrubs in your borders and areas where it's hard to farm. And like I said, this can work on any scale. Just apply it. I live in Salem. I have a big porch. I got a lot of plant life in pots. I use soil health principles even in my pots. So going back to my timber days when I used to work in forestry, and of course, woodland operators know some of the biggest issues with their operation is drainage from roads and skid trails and landings and stuff. And so that's all managed through the Forest Practices Acts. And there's lots, and by contacting your local forester, if you have issues with this kind of stuff, is your best bet. But, you know, keeping an eyeball on those roads, where water's draining, when it hits the road. Is it drain off into veg? You know, not a problem. But if it's draining straight to a stream, you're going to want to look at that. So I'm going to say for woodlands that you contact your local forester to address issues in those areas. If you have livestock or you're a horse stable owner or a boarder and you have pastures, you got to manage grazing in a manner that protects the ground cover. So on the left is a picture of, you know, a degraded pasture. And that is not going to help anybody there. Water's going to hit that, even in flat kind of ground, and just pond and not go into the ground and filter like it should. And on the right, you know, you've got horses in a pasture and you're managing for forage. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can rotate your pastures, come up with a grazing plan, fence off your streams. Livestock are allowed to cross and drink from streams, but they really shouldn't be hanging out in streams. They can flash graze if you know what you're doing along streams, but that, you know, you might want to get some technical assistance to do that kind of stuff. Here's a horse stable owners. They put in these, in the left is different pastures. So they rotate from their heavy use area in the front here to their pastures to control the amount of grazing they do and prevent degraded pasture lands. And on the right, another, you know, putting gravel and designating animal walkways and having paths to get around and will help you with that manure management. I mean, the pasture management. irrigation. We have it in all of our land uses. You know, if you've got a garden, you've all seen the water running off into the parking lot, being a little disappointed, or coming off a field into a ditch. You know, these are all situations that don't need to happen. Technology is allowing for different types of irrigation, from micro drip and spray drip, and water irrigation, water management. So really thinking about what your landscape needs to grow, and not overwatering or allowing it to enter into areas where it doesn't need to be watered. So all things you want to think about. And this water, like I said earlier, has all the pollutants in it, and that's what takes pollutants to our streams. Here are those different types of irrigation systems. I've helped put in a few. I think they work great. They reduce micro drip irrigation, reduces soil erosion from like a big gun or a spray gun spraying system by about 80%. So that's a big difference. And it also can target that water right to those roots. So things to consider. Manure, this is a big problem in the Willamette Valley. Working for ODA, we get complaints about this all the time. It's probably our biggest hit of issues next to soil erosion. Some people start livestock and stables, and they don't know what to do with the manure. And so on the left here, in the upper left, is a complaint we went to with manure pile. And that's a stream in the background where the trees are. There's a stream back there, and it's on the ground. It's not on a impermeable surface. So this was draining off into the stream, and it was leaching into the ground. And so the landowner worked with the district on this one and got in a composting and manure storage facility to help manage and keep that manure covered. Your best bet is to get it off site by October. So if there's people who can use it, or if you can apply it agronomically to your property, that's the best way. But letting it pile up like this, it can become a problem. And you know, you're gonna have to deal with it at some point. So something to think about when you've got manure as on your landscape. Again, streamside areas. On the left is a picture of a early hazelnut establishment orchard, and the soil is all bare, and it went into the winter, and the soil is being washed off into the stream in the upper right corner. Excuse me. And so this was a compliance issue. They were had to go in, and they worked with NRCS, and they got ground cover established on their aisles. They're working on, they switched to micro drip. They've done a lot of things. This site is really improved now. And on the other side, these are situations in the middle. This is where somebody decided to clean out a stream without a permit. Somebody turned them in. So this is what, they pulled all the sediment out, and they pulled it back on their stream bank, and they removed all the veg. And you know, there's a way to go about this. And it's through a permit and talking to DSL and letting them know what you want to do. Because, excuse me, going in after this and having, you know, the state agencies all come to your property and they're like, oh no, you know, they still end up having to pay for the permit, and they had to go through all that. And they got lucky. They didn't get fined anything extra, but they had to move all those spoils, and it created a lot of extra work for them. And same with on the right, you just don't want to remove vegetation from your stream. You just don't want to do that. So if you're not sure, before you cut something down along stream or stick something into the stream, you can call me at ODA. We can talk to your Soil and Water Conservation District or the Watershed Council, and I think they can get you where you need to go for those kind of situations. One more, this is an example of overgrazing on the left. This is a perennial stream, so it runs all year round. It's also fish bearing, it has salmon in it, and this property had been grazed for many decades. And a new landowner bought it, and they put goats and horses on it, and they got turned in. And you know, they had to fix this, and because not only did they need to fix it, but the stream had jumped its original channel, and because there's no trees and shrubs protecting the bank, it's slowly eroding toward their house, which is just off the photo to the left. So they had to fix it because it would start eroding into their home. And so they had to get project money and incentives. And, this cost a lot of money to get all this trees in there and root wads and stream. They had to put grass down, and they used this cover, this straw wattle, couldn't think of the word. And, it cost several $1,000s, about $100,000 project there. And that's what happens when you overgraze a stream. It ends up looking like that on the left. So just don't want to do that. I think I talked a little bit about pesticides. It can move into water many ways. Drift is one way. And the best way to stay in compliance with pesticide use is to read the label and do what the label says and use it for what the label says you can use it for. And make sure you're paying attention. Their labels are very specific now. They talk about dangers to pollinators and fish, some things you can't use in water. Sometimes you need a special permit for it. So if you're using pesticides, which is all things sides, so herbicides, insecticides, rodenticides, algicides, think about what happens with the stuff that doesn't get used, and where would it go on your property if it were to be removed, those residues taken to water. And let's see, in water conservation, I don't have a whole lot to say about this other than that we all know what we need to do as individuals to conserve water. I talked about earlier about that 1% of water that we all get to use. And we're lucky in the Willamette Valley because we have a really nice supply of water here. And, even as you look at climate science and moving forward, we're still going to have water in the Willamette Valley, but things may change to the point where our water comes faster and harder earlier. So, by June or May, we're dry and you have to irrigate. So we want to do our best to conserve water at an individual level. And I think you all know how to do that. And I think that's it for my slideshow. I'd love questions or anything I can do to answer, or especially if I left you with a bunch.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Brenda. Just a few things that I was picking up on during your talk is the connections you were making between soil and water quality. I think are really important. As an outdoor educator, that's something that I try to get across all the time is, when we think about ecology and landscapes, everything is connected. So all these topics are interrelated. And so I love that you're referencing talks for tonight and just other important aspects for folks to consider on the landscape.
Yes, and Mike, when it comes to soil erosion or soil issues on your property, you can find the problem and the solution in those, most likely in those 4 basic principles of soil health. So, just kind of move them around in there and make them happen.